Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. I pray that you all are doing well for all of those that are joining us. And I'm admitting folks and trying to figure out how all this stuff works. All right, let's see. All right. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank God for each and every one of you that's joining us as far as today's setting is concerned. And it is a wonderful delight of mine to have you here. And of course, I am humbled to have been asked to share this. One of the things about technology is making the shift and the adaptability that we need to make as far as that's concerned. So what I want to do is for those that have joined us, and I see that you all are muted, you have the capacity to unmute yourself if you have any questions. I only got now 50 minutes to share with you all because guess what? I have about 30 something people that'll be waiting for me at 10 o'clock for our new members class that I'm doing on Zoom as well. So I want to share with you all as far as this time is concerned. For those who don't know me, my name is Robert Scott. I serve as the senior pastor at St. Paul Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm definitely humbled to have been asked to share this with you. So what I want to do is talk to you all about developing new skills. And as we look at preparing to develop new skills, one of the things that I want to share with you is that we are living in some interesting times as far as today is concerned. So I'm going to talk to you all about where we are with this capacity as far as the times that we are dealing with. And it is my hope and prayer that during this time together, that if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Now, there's one thing that I wish I could do that I don't have the capacity to do right now, and that is to share my screen. And they're telling me I will have to log out and log back in order to do that. And I don't want to cause us to miss out on the time that we have. So I'm not going to be able to share my screen with you all, but I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I hope and pray will be beneficial and will bless you all as far as our time together is concerned. That being said, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer as we sense and seek what the Lord wants to do as far as this time is concerned. God, we come to you right now. And we thank you for the wonderful opportunity to be able to have this conversation for the time that is ours. And Lord, in all sincerity, we need you to be present with us and to hear us as far as this moment is concerned. So Lord, if you would show yourself strong and mighty, have your way in this conversation, and we'll bless your name for that. It's in the name of your son, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. So developing new skill sets. This is what we're going to be dealing with as far as our time is concerned today, developing new skill sets. And why is it necessary for us to develop new skill sets? I'm glad you asked, because we are living in some different times now, and we're living in some challenging times now. And because we're living in some different and challenging times, it's going to cause for us to do some things differently. So let me start off by making this comment, and then hopefully and prayerfully, you will ask questions or engage us as far as this moment is concerned. The world as we know it has ended. Let me say that again. The world as we know it has ended. And how is that? Because it ended on December 2019 when COVID was discovered in Wuhan, China. All right. And what this pandemic has done, sisters and brothers, it has created a major shift in communications, collaborations, and community because of temporary isolation. Now, this is very important for us to understand because we can no longer get together like we used to. And now we find ourselves going back and forth between hybrid and being in person and things of that sort. Now, this is where I really want to lean in on this next comment. The Black church likes progress, but it hates change. And we've been slow to make necessary changes. Okay? We've been very slow in making necessary changes. As a matter of fact, if we could be honest, the Black church has always been 15 to 20 years behind the white church. Okay? We've always been 15 to 20 years behind the white church. Now, the only constant in today's culture is change. Let me say that again. The only constant in today's culture is change. All right. And this is very important for us to understand by virtue of the fact that when it comes to the church, we don't want to change. We don't want to change. We're like the tree planted by the rivers of water. I shall not be moved. We don't want to change. So that being said, this is where we find ourselves in today's culture. And here are the issues facing the Black church. And here are the issues facing those of us who take pastoring seriously. All right. Number one, the post-COVID, post-pandemic church is not going to be filled to capacity. In other words, many of us think that people are going to be coming back to our churches in droves, and that is not going to happen. I am sorry to burst some bubbles, but that's not going to happen. Okay? So churches are not going to be filled to capacity like they were before if they were filled then. Okay? The second thing is we can't go back to how we did things before the pandemic. Now, this is the crux of the matter. We cannot go back to how we were doing things before the pandemic. So what does that look like? That means that churches must embrace the phygital, P-H-Y-G-I-T-A-L, the phygital aspect of worship and membership. Now, what does phygital mean? Phygital is physical and digital, two words merged together. Phygital, P-H-Y-G-I-T-A-L, the phygital aspect of worship and membership. Okay? All right. Now, here are some things that we don't want to talk about in today's culture, particularly in the Black church as we deal with this pandemic. But according to the prognosticators like the Barna Group and some other groups, here's what they're saying. And unfortunately, it hits the Black church even worse. 1 out of 5 churches will not survive this pandemic. In other words, 20% of the churches that we know of is going to close shop within the next 3 to 5 years. Why? Because they're not going to want to make the change. Okay. 40% of the people aren't coming back to worship. And I know that's a sobering reality, but 40% of the people aren't going to come back to worship. Now, here is where the rubber hits the road because a lot of churches don't want to embrace technology. There are a lot of folks and a lot of churches, particularly Black churches, don't want screens in their church or don't want to be dealing with technology or things of that sort. But I'm here to say that if you are afraid to embrace technology, you will find yourself way behind, and ultimately you will find yourself out the loop. So technology capacities and social media competencies must be embraced even for staff considerations, either paid or voluntarily. Now, what is meant by that? That means that how we've been staffing our churches in the past, got to make some shifts. We've been so concerned about executive pastor. We've been concerned about minister for Christian ed, children and youth pastor, young adult pastor, but you're going to need a digital pastor for the future. You need to have somebody that is competent in being able to manage your technology and social media. And sometimes that person can be one and the same, or it could be two different people. So what you need is you need to look at having some person that knows how to, watch this, create content and buzz on social media platforms, on your websites, on your Facebook page, but then also be aware of the current trends as far as technology to keep people engaged. Okay. All right. So here's where we find ourselves, my sisters and brothers, in 2022 on January the 29th. The culture of America is becoming anti-Christian and post-Christian. All right. We're becoming anti-Christian and post-Christian. So what is meant by that? Basically, what is happening as far as the church is concerned, the world is concerned, is that anti-Christian is against the church and against Christ. And we see that particularly here in America, our culture is becoming more secularized, even more profane. Post-Christian basically means that Jesus is not the preeminent religious figure, and the church is not respected as a preeminent institution anymore. All right. Which means that, watch this, most Black churches are going to have a lot of empty seats and a lot of extra space, if they haven't already had it. All right. So these are some of the realities that we find ourselves dealing with. Now, there are 5 core problems that the church is going to have to deal with as we move forward from this point. And here they are. And you can write this down. God, I wish but I tell y'all what I'm gonna do. I'm going to send my presentation to Dr. Barr, and his staff can get it out to you. Will that be fine for you? Okay. So 5 core problems, and you may want to write them down. I wish I could share my screen with you, but you can write these down. The first one is digital ministry. Digital ministry. The second one is ministry to families. Okay. The third one, impactful disciple making. And I can stay on that for a day and a half, because most churches are not good at disciple making because we don't take it seriously. And what do I mean by that? Unfortunately, a lot of churches, we let folks join church, and the next thing you know, they join one Sunday, they're serving as an usher or singing in the choir the next Sunday, and totally clueless about why we do the things that we do. The other one is intentional outreach. I mentioned before, 40% of the people ain't coming back to church. I have one preacher who has, with St. Paul, we've been open since August. And I had one pastor come up to me and said, well, how you all open up? What am I going to do with 7,000 folks? I can't open back up and seat 7,000 folks comfortably. And you know what my response was to that person? 7,000 folks ain't coming back to your church. They're not. And he looked at me very quizzically, but I told him 7,000 folks ain't coming back to your church. They're not. So got to be intentional about outreach, because guess what? If 40% of the people ain't coming back to church, that gives you the opportunity to outreach and replace that 40% with those that will. And trust me, when I get to that point, I'm going to talk about how there are folks in your family circles and others who do not know Jesus Christ and the pardon of their sins. And then finally, communication. Communication. Okay, communication. So let's talk about digital ministry, because this is going to be very key as far as how we move forward and do the work that the Lord will have for us to do. Digital ministry. Churches are trying to figure out how to establish a digital ministry that connects people outside the church and outside the faith. All right. At the same time, they also want to provide online experiences for people who are already connected to the church. So to break that down and to delve a little deeper about what I mean by that, here's what I'm saying. That if you really want to be serious about digital ministry, and this is going to be a major shift for a lot of us, stop creating an experience.
You should have gotten something from an email with a link, a Zoom link in it.
Okay. Stop creating experiences for people who are inside your sanctuary or your church, and start creating the experience for people who are watching. At St. Paul, I tell every Sunday I come out and we do and we stream across our platforms. I tell the folks, listen, this is a production now. We're gonna let the Spirit move, we're gonna let the Spirit have his way. But we got to create the experience for people who are watching us. Okay? Not for people who are in the house. Now, what does that mean? That means you got to have the best quality you can have as far as streaming is concerned, or putting stuff on Facebook and things of that sort. Secondly, you can't have no dead spaces or no lag time. You got to move. It's got to be like a television production. And that's easy to do. But you can't do it the way that you've been doing it in the past. You can't have a whole bunch of announcements. You can't do service for 2.5 hours. Not expect for folks to remain connected online. All right. So you got to produce the experience, not for the people that are coming to church, but for the people that are watching you. All right. So here's the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is you got to realize you need a new team or a new group or a new mindset to target specifically online audience. That's why I was talking about you got to have somebody that may be a digital minister or something like that. And there's one more example of how to change a strategy that requires change in our structure. Now, I'm going to give you all a secret about what happened at St. Paul. I was trying to hold one of my media people accountable at St. Paul. We were paying this person a certain amount of money. The person wouldn't get to church till like 7:15, service started at 7:30. and you wouldn't get to church at 7:15 trying to get mics and all that stuff situated. I'm going like, that ain't gonna work. So that person quit and the whole media team quit. And I had to build a new media team from scratch. Okay. Here's the other thing that I had to do. We had a live stream at St. Paul, but it wasn't all that good. On a scale of 1 to 10, as far, because I push 5-star excellence. On a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 2. And I felt that was not representative of the Lord, and it certainly wasn't representative of me. So what we did at St. Paul, I went to the board and the church. We made a major investment in lights and cameras and new soundboards and stuff like that. I was getting my tail kicked in the streets by my critics who were saying, we don't need to be dropping all this money in the pandemic. I mean, all this money for lights and cameras and all. I mean, they were wearing me out in these Charlotte streets. Lo and behold, we started that in 2019. We got it up and running the 4th Sunday of February 2020. And we know what happened in March 2020. Okay. 2nd Sunday in March 2020 was my last Sunday as far as having a full congregation at St. Paul Church. And had we not done that, we would have been way behind the curve, because guess what? In today's culture, if your online presence is shoddy, folks will change channels like changing channels on the television, and they will not come back. All right. So it requires a change in your structure and a change in strategy, and it's got to be intentional. The next one is ministry to families. Ministry to families, and this is very important because, number one, churches are starting to recognize that reaching young adults is critical to the future of the church, and more churches are beginning to prioritize ministries to these young families. All right, now let me drop something on y'all. If I can, stop focusing on the millennials. For God's sakes, they're good and grown. The next generation is Gen Z and Gen Alpha. All right. It's not the millennials. Okay. We treat millennials like they're young adults. They're not young adults anymore. 40 is not young adult. When I was 40, I had a child, I had a mortgage, and I had a major church. 40 is not young adult. That's middle age. Millennials are in their mid to late 30s. All right. But we got to focus on young families. Number 2, we got to recognize that environments and experiences for kids. So what am I saying? Think about newborn or preschool through elementary school. We got to have that tight if you want your churches to shift. All right. Part of my dream and vision at St. Paul is sometime in the near future, we have a first floor in our old educational building. I want to gut it, and I want to turn it into to children's space. I want to gut it and turn it into children's space with technology and the capacity to do major work for our children. Okay. The other thing is churches are trying to equip and partner with parents, both single and married. And let's be honest, there are more single parents that come to our churches than married. All right. And let me say this while I'm at it. Stop making single folks think that it's bad to be single. If we are honest, some of us that are married wish we were single. Okay. We got to stop making single folks feel like something is wrong with them because they're single. Marriage is not meant for everybody. So we got to be willing to meet people where they are. All right. Here's what else we got to understand. We got to understand that children don't drive themselves to church. All right. So churches who want to reach kids for Jesus are to prioritize creating in-person and online experiences that their parents want to engage in with as well. And this is probably the number one priority of an effective ministry to kids. So at St. Paul, what we have done is on Sunday afternoon, we have what we call our Sunday school for kids at 2:00. My youth minister, Reverend Peyton C., has Bible study for middle and high school students during the week on Zoom. All right. And let me just say that for the most part, I have not had an in-person Bible study since the pandemic, but been reaching more people than would have come to Bible study. All right. The third one is impactful disciple making. So churches are having difficulty creating a solid and simple discipleship path to help regular attendees as well as newcomers to take the next step in their walk with Christ. So many churches, and I know this may upset some folks. Many churches have a lot of programs available, but no path for discipleship that help people to learn which steps to take. In other words, we got a whole lot of programs that ain't making disciples. Now you're talking about change. I'm getting ready to really drop something. Some of that stuff we need to drop because it does nothing for building the sake of for the sake of the kingdom. All right. Those churches that do not have a clear track for spiritual formation often do not have specific steps to encourage relational evangelism. And that may be why the next core issue is trending. So, like I just shared with you all, in about 20, 25 minutes, I'm getting off this call. Why? Because I got about 30-something people that are waiting for me to join them so I could teach them new members class. As pastor, I teach all the new member classes at St. Paul. Been doing that since I've been there. Why? Because it gives those persons the capacity to get to know their pastor on a more intimate level and to have conversation with me that they normally would not have. And it helps to close the back door. Now, here's what I want to share with you also. We don't just accept people who walk down the aisle talking about they want to give their hand to Jesus and give the pastor their hand and their heart to God. What do I mean by that? We require that if you want to be a part of the St. Paul Church, you got to go through new members class. So we don't even count you if you don't go through new members class. It is an expectation, and people rise to the level of expectation. Okay. It also helps us with our retention rate as well. All right. This helps me to translate to our next point, which is intentional outreach. Here's the crux of the matter. For many churches, don't have an outreach strategy. Okay. And I know I'm getting ready to make somebody mad when I say this, but we think that outreach is serving the community. That's not outreach. That's mission, but it ain't outreach. We think that if we, pass out groceries or do housing and stuff like that, that folks gonna take the next step to Jesus and join your church, and it doesn't happen. You wanna know why? Because you did not invite them to have a relationship with Jesus. You just thought giving them a bag of grocery, they would come to your church. They ain't coming to your church. So we got to be intentional about sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. You got to be intentional about asking people to come to your church. But outreach is going to look different from this point forward. Because guess what? Jehovah's Witnesses ain't going around knocking on doors anymore. They sending out mailings now. Because that knocking on door stuff don't work for a whole lot of folks. Knock on the wrong door, you might wind up with something. Okay. So let me, if I could, give you a two-pronged approach to what outreach can look like. And it's so simple, it's crazy. Here it is. Relational evangelism. That is encouraging people in the church to reach people God has in their daily lives. Watch this. How many of us know folks in our family, on our jobs, or in other places that we frequent that do not know who Jesus Christ is and is not going to anybody's church? Have you shared with them what a relationship with God through Jesus Christ looks like? And here's the deal. And you ain't got to have no big old Bible under your arm hitting them over the head talking about you going to hell. It doesn't work like that. All right. The second thing is using online engagement and having content and experiences that engage with people who are outside the church and outside the faith. Using your social media to reach people for Christ. All right. But that first one, relational evangelism, is going to be the modality of moving forward. All right. Many of us know people that are in our circles that ain't going to nobody's church, don't have a relationship with God. And God has given us opportunity to reach out to them. Okay. The fifth and final one is communication. And this is going to be very key for moving forward as far as churches are concerned. We got two challenges. Most churches don't even have an intentional communication strategy to connect with people they're trying to reach, both as members and as potential members. So if there's a communication gap inside the church, you can imagine there's a communication gap, outside of the church. And so part of what we have to understand is that we got to share with our people in the church. And let me say this, and I know this gonna kind of put a crawl in some of us, but it can't be done on Sunday morning. You got to do it outside of Sunday morning. There has to be communication outside of Sunday morning. Okay. And it has to be intentional. One of the things that when the pandemic hit, St. Paul, according to the last time I looked at our roster, had 5,432 people that claim to be part of St. Paul. And you notice I used the word claim. What I did was I had our deacons family ministry to break down that list and to give it to all of our deacons. And I got 15 deacons in training that I had them break it down to. And I had them to call every person who claimed to be part of St. Paul. Okay. Just to touch base with them, reach out. And you'd be surprised how that went a long way during this pandemic. So we're now doing it about 3 or 4 times a year. Just give them a call. Hey, how you doing? How things going? Da, 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 da. Communication. Communication is going to be very important. And then finally, the second challenge is often linked to a clear path of discipling. So without communication, ministry programs and events, and God knows our churches can have a whole lot, begin to compete with each other for people's times and attention. And when that happens, there's a sense among both the staff and the congregation that there's a communication problem. And in the cases with many churches, it's a complexity problem. Because guess what? And I think this is where we as churches have to really understand what our gifts are and where God has us. No church is expected to do it all. But and this is why we got to partner with other ministries and churches that are doing what we can't do and give them support. No church is expected to do it all. But whatever your church can do, it ought to do it well. The problem with a lot of churches is we think we're supposed to be all to everybody, and you can't. Got to find out what your strength is, flow in that strength, do it well, and churches that may be doing what you wish you could do, or ministries, partnering with them, because the key word moving forward is cooperation and collaboration. Partnering with them so that the work of spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ and making disciples can be obtained. So that's kind of my sharing that I have for you all right now. And at this time, I avail myself to any questions or comments that you all may have as far as our time is concerned for the next 15 minutes. And you can unmute yourself if you have any questions or comments.
Dr. Scott, I think it's just a comment. Great lecture, great information. I think it's going to be valuable to everyone moving forward in post-pandemic. And thank you for that. And I'm glad it's going to be out on the site later so other people, we can take other people to it in our churches. But we need that type leadership going forward in our churches, in our convention, that's thinking after the pandemic and not being so far behind the lag of this power of the curve. And we need to be ahead of it. So I think this and this type leadership and information will help churches in the General Baptist State Convention. And as we also collaborate with our AME Zion and our friends and telling them the information. So great information.
You're welcome.
Dr. Scott.
I have a.
All right. I heard a female voice before I heard you, Brother Thomas. Who is the female?
This is Lillie Moss.
Yes, Sister Moss. And then Brother Thomas, I'll come to you.
At the beginning of your presentation, you made the statement that the Black churches are 15%, if I heard it right, 15% behind the white churches.
No, ma'am, you didn't hear that right. It's 15 years.
15 years, okay, 15 years behind the white churches.
Yes, ma'am.
My question to you is there a standard that we have to be with the white churches? And if so, what is it the white churches are doing that we need to be doing?
That's a great question, Sister Moss. So when I talk about being 10 to 15 years behind the white church, I'm talking about when it comes to technology, when it comes to embracing change. So guess what? You still have churches that don't even have screens, Black churches. And the interesting thing is that white churches are now moving to holograms. So when I talk about changes, interestingly, in the Black church ethos, we wind up replicating what they do, but we wind up being 10 to 15 years behind what they're doing, technology-wise, staff-wise, shifting-wise. So your question about is the white church the standard? No, the white church is the standard, but they do have some good practices that we can glean from and learn and develop and move forward. There's here in Charlotte, there is a church, a white pastor. I kind of follow him from afar. His name is Dr. James Emery White. He pastors Mecklenburg Community Church. Now, he's relatively conservative in his theology, but he is so on point when it comes to, first of all, growth. Second of all, use of technology. His staff is half of his staff is under 30. And 70% of the people who are members of his church have never been members of anybody's church. In other words, they were sinners straight from the street. So I glean from what he does, but I've learned how to take what white folks do and blackenize it. You eat the meat and spit out the bones, as my late mentor, the Reverend Dr. Sam DeWitt Proctor, would say. So when I say 10 to 15 years, we're behind when it comes to technology, when it comes to best practices sometimes, and things of that sort. So that's what I meant by that, Sister Moss.
Thank you, but we do have some Black churches that are on target. So I don't want to leave them out.
Well, here's the thing. If you notice, I didn't say all Black churches. I'm speaking in generality, not specificity. Okay. And the other thing is, yeah.
And I'll take that, Dr. Scott.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
My question is, Dr. Scott, do you not think in 10 years or so, when the pandemic is well behind us, that things will come back to kind of what they used to be?
No, sir. Let me say that with an equivocal no. No. And here's why. Because things from a technology perspective, things from an engagement perspective, and things from a public perspective have shifted. And it's not going back to what it was. And let me say this, if it does, whether you realize it or not, you have placed yourself in the ICU sociological unit and you're going to be dying. You can't go back to what you used to have. Now, does that mean that we won't ever have churches that are full again? Doesn't mean that. Does it ever mean that we won't be able to gather like we used to? Doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is that the engagement and how we approach people and how we deal with folks has drastically got to shift, because if it doesn't, guess what? Young folks ain't coming to your church. The largest church in the world, not the world, the largest church in the United States of America right now does not even have a church building. It's Life Church. Life Church got 60,000 members and they ain't got no permanent church building. But they're making disciples, they're transforming the world, and they're getting engaged in their mission. And they have no church building. So when we talk about trying to go back, that's like when the children of Israel were out in the wilderness getting ready to go to the promised land, and you had a group of folks saying, let's go back to Egypt.
We had it better back then.
Yeah, why you bring us out here to die? We could have died in Egypt. Yeah, you could have. And I don't want to make the mistake of our biblical foreparents and be fussing about the shifts that need to be made so that we can not only survive, but thrive as far as this is concerned.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You got a hand up.
Yes. Mickle or Mickle Mitchell?
Mike Mitchell. Mike Mitchell. It's okay. Mike Mitchell. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much. My question is this. It kind of ties into some of what has been discussed greatly already. How would you recommend or suggest that we adapt or reach out to ask all to accept change since the pandemic, since the COVID-19, because I agree that we can't go back, but there has to be a great deal of changes, and as Black churches, we don't do well with change. Yeah. So because that's just the nature of it. So how would you suggest that we approach and try to get our congregations to go out and change?
That's a great question. I think that sometimes for some pastors and other people, we try to make such a drastic change that we knock people out of kilter, and we don't explain why we're making the change, or don't really give insight into why the change needs to be made and things of that sort. So I think that first of all, you really have to do what I would say teaching on why we need to do what we need to do. Teaching, explaining, letting folks talk about their concerns and their fears and things like that. Because for a lot of churches, when change happens, some folks, they lose their position and their power. And as my spiritual father, the late Reverend Dr. Charles Booth would say, let me put the hay where the cows can get it. So for some folks, it's really usurping their power and position. So we have to explain to people what change is like. Right. Second of all, it's sometimes the change don't need to be drastic. Sometimes you just need to make some small incremental changes that really change the trajectory of your future. So if we were getting on a plane and we were going from say, for instance, North Carolina to San Francisco, regardless of what airport you fly out of, if you make a 1 degree change to the flight plan, either north or south, you will wind up either in Seattle, Washington, or in Mexico, just by making a small 1 degree change over the long term of the flight. So what I mean by that is sometimes the change don't need to be so drastic. It could be some small incremental changes that help to change the future trajectory of where you're trying to go. Now, when I came to St. Paul, I made some changes, but the changes that I made, particularly with what we needed to do, and here's the thing, and it tickles me, Brother Mike, what my critics were saying. I'm telling you, my critics, they were killing me in those Charlotte streets when I was putting spotlights and stage lights in the sanctuary and tore down their big lights that were hanging over the sanctuary and all that stuff, and putting in new cameras and all that. I mean, they were killing me. And when I say they were killing me, they were killing me until we went live and until the pandemic hit. And then when the pandemic hit, them same folks going, "Oh, look at what us doing." and so the thing is, but here's the thing, Brother Mike. I wasn't doing that because I ain't know a pandemic was coming. I was doing that because I hated the way our live stream looked. It looked crappy, and I hated it. And I felt the Lord deserved better. And I was like, we ain't doing this no more, not with my name on it, not with God's name on it, unless we change it. I didn't know a pandemic was coming. I was just trying to do it because I wanted to raise the level of excellency, effectiveness, and efficacy.
Got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Sister Michelle?
Yes, Dr. Scott, thank you for your lecture. I have concerns as well concerning outreach. How successful has relational evangelism been in your congregation? Have they grabbed hold of that vision?
No, but you can't give up on it.
Okay.
because here's the thing, Sister Michelle. What has to happen now because of the pandemic, what has to happen is some major shifts. Number one, we got to do that. Relational evangelism falls under what I call adaptive evangelism. And I'm getting ready to go to Mississippi to do a lecture for their state convention in March on that. And adaptive evangelism has to be 3 things. Number one, it has to be trauma informed, because people are dealing with a lot of trauma today. So when you're talking to people and evangelizing, you really need to find out where their pain is.
Okay.
Number 2, it needs to be relational, because most of the time, the people that we can convince to have a relationship with Jesus Christ are people that know us. Right. But here's the thing, you got to be living that life in order to attract.
Right.
And then number 3, you have to let people know what the expectations are, and that's disciple making. Not just getting saved and getting a get out of hell free card, but letting them understand what is required. And we don't do a good job of that. So one of the things that, that every now and then I'll preach on and teach on is, how every person who claims to have a relationship with Jesus Christ is an evangelist.
Right. Right.
And that relationship evangelism comes with this. Dr. William Turner, who was one of my professors at Duke when I was in seminary back in the early 90s, you said this: folks don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's what relational evangelism ultimately boils down to. So has the whole church caught on to it? God knows. No, that's just like the whole church ain't caught on to my vision of giving tithes and offerings. But I got enough folks that are catching on to it, that's creating some shifts. Which is why I got 30-something folks that have joined church. Yeah. Oh gosh, since October, November, that's waiting for me to leave this class and join them in a few minutes to do new members.
That is awesome during this time to have any persons joining.
Yeah. Yeah. And the crazy thing is they've been joining it online, and they're not, and some of them ain't in North Carolina.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
Thank
I have
you.
time for one more question or comment. One more question or comment.
I have one. Can you hear me?
Sister Natalie, yes.
All right. I'm from Sister Natalie's church. We are St. Paul also.
Okay.
But my name is Brenda.
Oh, Brenda. Okay. I saw Natalie.
No, we're in her room.
Okay.
The question that I have is, when you teach or preach, do you simultaneously divide the youth from your regular message, or do you have them all listening at the same time? I heard you say that you had Bible study for the youth separately, but for church services, is there a split in terms of teaching them at their level of understanding?
So that's a great question. I do both. And what do I mean by that? We have a youth church at St. Paul that meets twice a month. And then the other 2 Sundays, they are with us in worship. Now, what I'm getting ready to say goes against what we've been doing in the past, as far as a lot of churches, because not a lot of churches, some churches rather, have separated children from youth, and children and youth from the adults as far as worship is concerned. And what we have done is we have created a group of young people who do not appreciate being in adult worship because they think that church is supposed to be fun. And it's not a good tool for discipling. So we do both at St. Paul. And what winds up happening when you have that as your continuing thing, where they're not with the adults, then they don't know how to act when they do come with the adults. And what you produce is, by the time they get to be 18, they don't want to go to church because it ain't what they thought it was when they were doing youth and children's church. So we do both, and we do it with a level of intentionality. The other thing is, I have a 12-year-old, and my 12-year-old daughter, of course, she's a PK, but even at 12-year-old, I try to. My preaching is schizophrenic. And what do I mean by that? I'm all over the place. So I preach to the older saints. I preach to saints in my peer group. I preach to the younger, and I preach to the kids. And what do I mean by that is, I'm using language all throughout my sermon that hits them wherever they are. And that requires intentionality.
Yes. Thank you. You're dynamic.
Thank you. I'm humbled by your comment. Thank you for that encouragement. All right. Well, good people, I'm going to have to go. It is 9:57. I hope and pray that something has been said. I'm going to send my presentation to Dr. Barr, and I'll let him distribute however they feel that needs to be. But thank you all so much for your time and for your listening and for your questions. I am humbled by that, and it's my prayer that something has been said that will encourage you all. Let me close with this. Charles Dickens says, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. He said that in his book, The Tale of Two Cities, best of time and worst time. It was the best of times and the worst of times at the same time. We as a church in particular, and the Lord's church in general, have a wonderful opportunity to do one or two things. We could either curse the darkness, or we can embrace the shift and move to something greater. That we can move from just surviving to thriving and taking this opportunity to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ in a very, very meaningful way that will allow for God to be glorified. Because guess what? Our local church's ultimate responsibility is to make disciples. That's the Great Commission. And to teach them what Jesus has taught us so that we can replicate what he would have for us to be in the earth. So listen, it's a great time to be alive. And even with Omicron and all this other stuff, we have the opportunity to really do some things that will impact the kingdom. So I don't despair. I look forward with great anticipation on what the Lord is going to do. And as we move forward, we will not go back to Egypt, but we're going to press forward toward the Canaan land. And have milk and honey and carry figs that we have to carry on poles. God bless you all. And you all have a blessed Saturday. And for those that are pastors and preaching tomorrow, may the Lord bless you with a word from on high. Take care.